And of course, the question always comes up, but don't beans contain these harmful lectins, and aren't lectins dangerous? And in fact, it's a really interesting story. Lectins are throughout the food supply. Even dairy products contain a fair number of lectins. So it's not just beans that contain lectins. The other thing to know about lectins is there are a variety of lectins in the food supply. So there are some that have actually been found to be anti-carcinogenic, and others that have found to be quite toxic. And so not all lectins are really dangerous. But within the legume family, the legumes that contain the less dangerous lectins are the smaller legumes like lentils and peas. The legumes that contain the more dangerous lectins are the big beans, like kidney beans especially. And they contain a kind of lectin called hemagglutinin, which can be quite toxic. So if you eat undercooked kidney beans, you will get quite sick. You'll get like a food poisoning kind of deal where for 4 or 5 hours, it's coming out both ends and you're in terrible pain. So the key isn't not to eat legumes. The key is to cook the legumes, because cooking destroys the lectins. So, and not very many people eat undercooked beans. Beans, once they're cooked, you should be able to, press them at the roof of your mouth with your tongue, and they should be able to be broken that way to be thoroughly cooked. And using an instant pot or some tool like that to cook them really well is not a bad plan. But I don't think we need to worry about lectins when we're consuming properly cooked beans. And the other thing to say about beans are most decisively linked to health benefits. They're one of the only foods that are common to all blue zones. So if they were really toxic, do you think they would be a staple in every single one of the world's longest lived populations? It wouldn't even make sense. If they were that lethal, they'd be the shortest living people on the planet, not the longest living people on the planet. So I think that kind of disarms the lectin argument. So let's compare legumes to meat. So legumes, this keeps kind of going, okay, it's back. Legumes are the highest fiber foods. Meat has no fiber. Legumes are high in phytochemicals. Meat has no phytochemicals. Legumes are high in antioxidants. Meat contains minimal antioxidants. Legumes are low in fat. They're low in saturated fat. Actually, very low in fat. Most legumes are only about 5% fat. So very low in fat, very low in saturated fat. Do you know what the highest fat legume is? Well, the peanut, yes. And we usually think of the peanut as a nut, but it really is a legume, and it is. The next would be soybeans, which are about 40% fat, and then garbanzos. So, yeah, and then garbanzos at about 13%. But most other legumes are at about 5%, so very low. Of course, meat is high in fat and high in saturated fat. About 30 to 60% of the calories in meat, depending on how lean it is, come from fat. And legumes are cholesterol-free. Meat is high in cholesterol. Legumes contain a kind of iron called non-heme iron, which we'll talk about later. Meat contains both non-heme and heme iron. About 40% of the iron in meat is in the heme form, but it can serve as a pro-oxidant, which is the exact opposite of an antioxidant. And you know what I want to tell you, just so you understand this whole thing about antioxidants. So you've heard about free radicals, right? Now, free radicals are these molecules with an unpaired electron. And they come in and they try to steal an electron from another molecule in the body. And when they steal that electron, guess what happens to the other molecule? It becomes a free radical. And so it's like these little thieves that are going and trying to find an electron to steal, and it's like a chain reaction of destruction in the body. So just creating one free radical after the other, doing damage to the body. Guess what an antioxidant does? it walks in and it says, oh, hi, I see you're a free radical. Would you care to have an electron? And the free radical says, why, yes, thank you. But it doesn't turn into a free radical itself. It stays stable. And so that's the beauty of antioxidants, whereas pro-oxidants, they create free radicals. They do the exact opposite. They cause oxidative stress. And so heme iron can serve as one of these pro-oxidants. And then legumes have no added hormones or antibiotics. Meat often has added hormones. It has natural hormones, but it has hormones added and antibiotics added. Legumes do not contain any of this molecule called Nu-5-GC. This is a sialic acid that is actually quite pro-inflammatory, and it's found in meat. So, of course, meat contains Nu-5-GC. Legumes, you can't produce TMAO with the consumption of legumes, but you certainly with consumption of meat. So TMAO, trimethylamine and oxide, is something that comes from, usually from carnitine, but it can also be formed from choline. You eat meat, meat goes into your gut, and there's certain bacteria in the gut that convert that carnitine into TMA or trimethylamine. Then that gets shuttled to the liver where it gets turned into TMAO, and that TMAO is highly inflammatory. It's highly atherogenic, causing cardiovascular disease. So, and kidney disease, it's quite a problem. Now, what's really interesting about TMAO is if you're vegan, you don't have the bacteria to make it. You don't have those nasty bacteria in your intestinal tract. And what's really interesting is that there was a study done that actually fed vegans meat to see if they would produce TMAO. And they couldn't because the bacteria weren't in their intestinal tract. Or even if you give vegans a carnitine supplement, they can't turn the carnitine into TMAO. And then the legumes are low in chemical contaminants, and the meat tends to be higher because chemical contaminants tend to move up the food chain, especially persistent organic pollutants like dioxins and PCBs. And then the other thing that I didn't mention here is the endotoxins that are, the outer cell membrane of gram-negative bacteria that as they dissolve or die, these endotoxins can leak into the bloodstream, and again, they're highly inflammatory, and there are lots, especially in ground meat and processed meat, not so much in legumes. And if we look at red meat and mortality, we see a very consistent link in all of the meta-analyses we have that meat increases risk of death. But we also have similar meta-analyses looking at meat and diabetes. And this one you can see the processed meat, 2 of the studies, 51% increased risk. And this was the highest versus lowest intake, I believe. No, PAN was actually, this was incredible. In the PAN study, 2013, 1 serving of meat was, I think it was 3 ounces or 3.5 ounces, but a serving of processed meat was 1 ounce, unless it was a wiener, it was 1.5 ounces. But it was 1 ounce, and it was a 1/2 ounce of bacon. That was 1 serving. And for, having a serving or whatever it was, increased risk just dramatically. So a 1/2 ounce of bacon. Unbelievable. And so you can see very consistent link between meat and diabetes risk. This is meat and heart disease risk. You can see the processed meat in the dark red here and the processed in the light, but again, consistently higher risk. This is unprocessed meat and cancer risk. And in some studies, it was a fairly low relationship. But in a lot of studies, we're seeing, especially with colorectal cancer and bladder cancer, we're seeing quite a strong relationship between meat intake and cancer. This is processed meat and cancer. Very strong relationship. In fact, the link between processed meat and cancer is so strong that processed meat has been declared a group 1 human carcinogen. And you know, when you think about it, and red meat has been declared a group 2A or probable human carcinogen. But a group 1 human carcinogen is the highest rating, the strongest evidence for cancer. And so this is cigarettes, this is asbestos, this is alcohol, this is arsenic. And processed meat has been put into that same category. And maybe not as potent as some of those others, but still a potent carcinogen. And here we are. Have you ever come across a cancer fundraiser where they're selling hot dogs to raise money for cancer? It's like selling cigarettes to raise money for cancer. And we need to be really clear that this is not acceptable. And we need to get that when we're feeding this stuff to our children, these are carcinogens. So something just to be really aware of.